morning.
Good morning.
I hope this is not a very, it wasn't a very exhausting week for you, and you're happy it's Friday, and you're not too tired, and you're going to be able to follow a little bit what we're going to talk about today. I would like to thank, before I start, our colleagues from UNDP for giving us this opportunity to come here and talk to you today. Andrei, Mikhail, and Yelena, and they gave us this opportunity to tell you what we have been doing last winter. So you don't know what we did last winter, but after this, hopefully, you will know a little bit. My name is Stamatis Christopoulos, and today I'm going to talk about the governance of sustainable development. This presentation or this lecture is divided into two parts. The second part is divided to two parts as well, but I'm going to be doing the first part. I'm going to talk a little bit about sustainable development, something that you have been hearing a lot during this week, I think. Maybe already bored of listening to sustainable development. I don't know, countless times, right? You might have heard this already. Triple wins as an approach to sustainable development, and then I will begin a little journey that takes us to our neighbor in Croatia, which is going to be a new EU member state as of next year, a year from now. Then we're going to go all the way to Nepal, and then cross over China and go to Mongolia, see what happened there. For the second part of the presentation, I'm going to entrust you to the worthy brains and hands of my colleague from Finland, who will talk about the governance of governance for sustainable development. So I may just begin now. I'm pretty sure you've seen this already. It's everywhere in UNDP's presentation. I'm not going to go through this again. But what I can ask you here is, what do you think is sustainable development? But I don't want you to tell me about this. I would like you to tell me, what do you think that is there to be sustained, and what is there to be developed? So if we have any ideas now for a couple of minutes, I would be delighted to hear, what do you think is sustainable development in these terms? After one whole week.
Natural capital should be sustained and human capital should be developed.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
So natural capital should be at least sustained, human capital should be developed.
Okay, that's a good one. That's a good. I heard two keywords there. Two keywords. Anyone else? One more. All right. Okay. It's morning.
It's a human responsibility.
Okay. That should be
applied.
Should be applied. Okay. Yeah. Good one.
Should we develop the quality of life or well-being?
Okay. The quality of life should be further developed. What about the ones who have already? Like very good quality of life somewhere on this planet.
Sustain.
They should sustain that, right?
But it's up to what you mean by quality.
So what I'm understanding from here is that there is no such thing as sustainable development, like in one context. Yeah, sustainable development is something different. My sustainable development is different than yours. Yeah, sustainable development in Croatia is different from sustainable development in Africa or in South Africa, in Lesotho. So we're talking about one thing that is a million different things. this is what I'm getting from this conversation. And two key words that I heard from nature and people. So all these nice elaborate things that you see, economic prosperity and continuity, the economic social well-being and equity, environmental protection and resource conservation. Two or three simple words. It's about nature, people, and business. Yeah, simply put. Which is different every time in different contexts. So, enough about sustainable development for this morning. And you'll hear more later from our colleagues as well. Currently, we're focusing in UNDP and also in academia and in other organizations to what we call the triple win approach. What is the triple win approach? It's about policies and programming. So it's about actually identifying synergies for integrating successfully the three pillars of sustainable development. They now call them strands, by the way, in New York. Like all this, like 20 years, it was pillars, but now the pillars, they see that they cannot bring them together. It doesn't make sense. So now they call them strands. And if you have this idea, this picture, how DNA, like the double helix, it looks like. You know, you can bring this in a like triple helix sort of thing. This is what communications people in New York were talking about a while ago before Rio Plus 20. So it's about strands now that they twist together, and we're trying to find ways to integrate, to bridge them. Yeah, so many countries are already doing this for sustainable development. The three cases that we're going to talk about, it's exactly about how the three strands were brought together successfully and created good policies, and then that was supported by some appropriate governance, which brings us to this. Appropriate governance, yeah, it's essential for achieving something, whatever that is. Governance is a complex issue. It's like relies on many factors, but so does sustainable development. It's a complex issue. It's not something simple. So in that sense, you employ a complex approach to address a complex issue, which is, again, as I told you, different from one case to the other. So why we're doing this? We want to avoid a traditional development trajectory, meaning we want to avoid the fossil fuel-based economies, the fossil fuel-based growth that we have been having so far. We want to somehow shift the development trajectory to more sustainable ways. And again, sustainable. Too many times that I've been saying this word. Effective lawmaking, oversight, and representation. You must have laws, and you must have effective laws in order to do that. People must follow these laws. There must be control over something, there must be monitoring. Access to justice. Yeah, everybody should have equal access to justice. Justice is not only for the rich or for the poor, it's for everyone. Bending laws and not having right access to justice is a menace for sustainable, inclusive development. Accountability and transparency of governments. I mean, finally, something happens, somebody should pay for it. Governments say, no, they did it. It was BP in the Mexican Gulf. No, they should pay for it. But you condone this. I mean, you have the legal framework that actually let this thing happen. Fukushima, now they say, human mistake, of course. Yeah, humans made the system. So at the end of the day, it's a human mistake, whatever we're going to say. Also, you have to empower citizens. Empower citizens, shift their minds out of trivial stuff and make them think about sustainability. Act accordingly. Of course, a big issue, and my colleague Cole will tell you later during the course of this day, that gender equality and women's empowerment is something, it's half the population, no, they should be included in that. In many places they're not. So about these three cases. First, we're going to look into an energy efficiency program in Croatia. Then we're going to go to Nepal and see decentralized renewables program that was applied there. And then the third and the last one will be inclusive finance for sustainable development through microloans and green loans in Mongolia. So, Croatia. Why energy efficiency? Energy consumption. Croatia had been depleting resources and has been consuming huge amounts of energy in a wasteful way, 12 times above the European EU, the European Union average. Then in 2005, UNDP together with the Global Environment Facility came along and they initiated a program with social and governance components. So energy, like an environmental issue, and then they come in and they say, no, we bring a social aspect, we bring a governance aspect, see what happens. They wanted to create green jobs. They gave the municipalities the flexibility to address their own energy issues, so this was not designed and implemented centrally. There was a central component, but then there was a certain degree of flexibility coming in and there, here and there. So municipalities, had their own saying in this. And they wanted also to raise public awareness on the use of energy, climate change, and sustainable development. Buildings in Croatia and also in other parts of the world are maybe the biggest contributors to climate change. I can see our climate change, their expert frowning a little bit.
30% global.
Yeah, okay. Nice number, thanks. So when they started doing this project in Croatia, there was absolutely no framework for monitoring or managing, and what to say about reducing use of energy within the Croatian public sector. So, and that's a big chunk of buildings and big buildings in Croatia managed by the public sector, so different forms of management there. There was nothing. The city of Sisak, they volunteered and they said, yes, we want to pilot this project and we want to see how it works out. Is there anyone here from Croatia, by the way? Okay, all right. So I shouldn't be afraid. So the city of Sisak, they were experienced in terms of pollution. They were a polluted city, and they knew what it is to be pollution. And they had a lot of industries there, and they were the first ones to come along and say, "Yeah, we want to do it. Let's see how it works." So the results from this program. 50% of public sector buildings is now monitored under this. The program through 2008 produced some $18 million in cost savings and cut annual greenhouse gas emissions by 63 tons of CO2 equivalent. What is interesting in that is that the savings that they had from rational use of energy, they were enough to pay for the continuation of the program. So basically 1 year of savings runs the whole program. In the beginning, they had, I think, $4.5 million invested into this, so they jump-started the thing with one municipality coming as the pilot, and then many followed. Energy savings only can now fund the program, so it runs on its own. So here you have the economic continuity and the prosperity strand fusing in and producing successful results. Yeah. It was actually so successful that they want to replicate it in many other areas. They're thinking about Belarus, neighboring Serbia, Tajikistan, and many others. Is there anyone here from Nepal? Stay again? Okay. Okay. This is a nice picture from a rural area in Nepal. This program that, again, UNDP initiated there, it focused on renewable energy in rural areas. Why is that? 25% of the population was below poverty line. 80% of the energy consumption was on traditional biomass. So people, they were just going out and cutting down forests, basically, so they can come back home and they can have heat and they can have energy to cook. But since only 56% of the population has access or had access to electricity, this aspect was very big. So we have an environmental issue with deforestation, cooking with biomass inside the home brings us to a health issue, because we have polluted indoor air, and that is specifically a burden to women. So there's a gender issue as well. Why? Because the women, they're the ones who go out and cut the wood and bring the wood back in, and then they cook, and then they bring this air, and then the women and the children have increased percentage of respiratory diseases and so on. However, on the flip side of the coin, Nepal has a significant hydropower potential. So UNDP comes along in '96 and says, let's do some micro hydropower, decentralized. Yeah, communities can take energy immediately, directly from that. And let's, give to some families some nice efficient cooking stoves so that they don't breathe particles, dangerous particles from wood combustion. Through this, they managed to generate more income for the families and jobs. Why? Because the people were not engaged in the trivial task of spending the time for going out and collecting biomass. They had time during the day to do more efficient, more intellectual things, and they were able to develop businesses. They were able to sit down and talk about their problems. So it's a form of empowerment, of social empowerment also here. So in 2010, 60,000 households were connected to 307, that's an impressive number, 317 new micro hydropower plants, and 15,000 improved stoves were also installed. So this is exactly what it is about. The women, instead of being out collecting wood, they are inside, they have light in the night, they collect together, they do other things with their hands, they engage in intellectual conversations, they talk, and they have a better life. So, tangible results, 8% increase in household incomes in 2009. Yes?
How do you calculate that number? The 8% increase in household incomes?
How we calculate that number? That's a good question. And the good questions are the questions that is hard to get an answer to. So I can only improvise now if you want, but I will not do that. But if you're really interested in this, I can look into the material and get back to you later. Is that okay? Thanks. So, 50% reduction of household spending on energy, and that you can see how easily you can calculate. Yeah, from $41 to $19 annual costs of household expenses on energy. 40 new businesses for every new station, and 50% of electricity generated from micro hydropower in Nepal. Yeah.
In the whole country.
Yeah, whole country. Now, after these 317 micro hydropowers. Crossing all the way to Mongolia, and see that time is pressing me a little bit. So we have another solution. Yeah, it's a completely different thing, another version. Inclusive finance for sustainable development. This, by the way, is a picture from a coal mine in Mongolia. And it looks rather unwelcoming. I don't know if you agree. So, what about Mongolia? Economy is heavily relied on extractive industry. Coal, copper, gold. 50% of the population lives below poverty line, with very high vulnerability in terms of land degradation, a lot of land already degraded, and a lot of land very susceptible to the process of erosion and desertification. Air pollution, which brings us again to respiratory diseases, and high vulnerability to climate change, with severe winters over the last year coming in, with a huge impact on crop production and animal husbandry. So, Xac Bank, I should say, not Zach Bank, as my American colleagues, was established with support from UNDP as a non-bank microfinance institution in 1996. What they did was inclusive finance, meaning that they were targeting job creation and entrepreneurial opportunities for the vulnerable and for people just on the verge of poverty through microloans and green loans, like loans for green development. It was so successful that in 2011 it became the 4th largest commercial bank in Mongolia. So huge the economic potential for such things. In terms of results, 75% of the clients with loans under $2,500, like really mini loans, and then the rest 25% or 23, I think, percent with loans below $300. So really pico loans, yeah? It was focused in the rural areas because there you have the problems with the winter, the crop production, the animal husbandry, and they want to cover more than 50% of the population by the end of this year. So they supported low-income women as entrepreneurs and leaders. 50% of the clients are women. They also collaborated with the state. There you will see also another form of governance, how the private sector collaborates with the state. They collaborated with the Ministry of Social Welfare to give financial literacy trainings to more than 100 to kids in more than 130 schools. And we talked already about the green microloans program.
Can I ask a very short question?
Sure.
Which interest rates were they charging? Which interest rates were they charging from the people whom they gave the loan?
I think that it was very low, because they started as a non-bank.
So the delivery was kept low?
Yeah, they kept low, so people can take initially one sum, start develop a business, etc., and then pay it back like during a very long course of time with small installments. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. So let me just try to close this now. Sorry. Sorry, yes.
I have one question. Who paid the collateral for these people in case when they do not pay back the loan?
There was a 2-3% in the budget of the institution that was collateral.
So institution.
So it was calculated from the beginning. In the function, in the budget of the institution, they knew that there would be such cases. Statistically, they said we're going to have a 2 or 4% of that, so loans collateral, that it was already pre-calculated, and they were able to absorb that financially. I'm not an economist, but this is what I know about that.
So in this case, a regular client were artificially charged with high interest rate because of the fact that bad clients will not pay in time or will not be
Yeah, but probably a small fragment. But that works in any economy. No? This is exactly, yes, this is a good case in point, because as I said, they were addressing people on the verge of poverty. They were not addressing the super poor. Exactly because of that. That was a policy in there. And otherwise it wouldn't have worked. So just to quickly conclude here, we've seen these 3 cases, right? And there are 3 programs in 3 different places, doing 3 different things and addressing 3 different contexts of sustainable development. All 3 are integrated solutions, so they bring each strand together. One strand is binding with the other. But it's not that programs or solutions like this can set a country to a sustainable development path per se. It's not that these solutions can push us out of the traditional or the conventional development trajectory that we talked about in the beginning. But it's the experience that we're receiving or we are having from solutions like this, of fusing the different strands together. How does it work is the answer to a question. How do they come together to give us sustainable development at this level? So they give us a clearer perception of the mechanism, how to do that. And then it could be possibly applied to at a different level. So very quickly, we saw in Croatia local governments with flexibility to address their own energy issues, something designed centrally, but then they were given the freedom and they were told, do whatever you want. It was successful. In Nepal, we saw the utilization of natural potential to address environmental and money problems, so micro hydropower, decentralized. And in Mongolia, we saw the role of the different actors. So private sector, yeah, it's an important component of sustainability. You cannot do development like this and leave the private sector out. You have to include the private sector. We've seen it there. So with this, maybe I should just give you some recommended material. The presentations will be online. So there are 2 things maybe that would be interested to go through concerning what we talked about. One is UNDP 2012 report from New York, the triple wins for sustainable development. The link is right there, just click on it. And then there's a scientific paper that has, and this is what we did last week, as I told you, a scientific paper, open access, from the Journal of Public Administration and Development, which we co-authored together with Michael and together with Balázs Horvat, who you've seen, I think, what's Wednesday?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's open access. The link is there. Click. We're not on Facebook, so don't like us on Facebook. And on this note, I will just pass over the floor to Michael.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
So before I get this thing going, also I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me here, both from UNDP and Central European University. On a quick note, so now we hear some ideas of a political scientist. But yeah, before I think I have to disappoint you also, because I heard some rumors that made the round here that you expected some 93-year-old professor who's like shining in big experience, and even if I twist it down and turn it up, I'm not even 39, so I'm sorry for that. But I hope that's the only disappointment that I will give you today. Stamatis mentioned this paper, but I think before, as I started now with talking a little bit about me, some issues that I think it's always nice to know a bit about the background about a person, that why this certain approach comes and why certain weird ideas developed out of the mind of the person that talks to you. So as a background, I could say that I grew up in a very small village of 105 inhabitants in the northern part of Germany, 300 meters to the border of eastern Germany. So that where I experienced a very lively village community action. So. And after that, I moved to the big city of Berlin, and little Michael was studying international relations and European integration theory, and he realized, but why is nobody talking actually about the beauty of endogenous development and success stories of the local level? So nothing was there. I went over to Finland, and I found it there. So there's a lively discussion and debate of rural development policy that has its starting at the local level, and so that's what I'm doing basically in this MTT, which is a state research institute under the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry. So we do rural development research, eco-villages, rural power structures, the future of agricultural policy with a view to rural issues. And then I'm also visiting professor at Tallinn University of Technology, the Department of Public Administration, where we do more like regional policy, regional governance. Trying to understand the idiocy of municipal mergers and those funny things that you find in the European Union at the moment. So we started. Stamatis took you to a journey to different parts of the globe. I would also like to continue this journey, but not focusing on sustainable development. But on the second part of this presentation, I will look at governance. And as I learned that you have quite different backgrounds, so it's a very heterogeneous group, I thought to look at governance from many different angles. So we start in ancient Greece, look at the origin of the concept, then we look at what is actually the role of government in governance, then we look at good governance, because it's all around, especially now as we talk about the UNDP. There's some critical analysis towards good governance also, and I think we need to mention them. There's another different problems of governance, and then we slightly move towards meta-governance. And in order not to start with meta-governance, because it's probably not at all clear to people what meta-governance is, but I hope it will be after my little intervention here. I think this makes sense to start from the very basics. So this will be the second part of this morning, or the first part of my lecture. And then we look at a little bit at the article that Stamatis mentioned on his last slide that we co-authored with Balázs on that we titled Advancing the Governance of Cross-Sectoral Policies for Sustainable Development, and we applied a meta-governance perspective there. So let's start with governance definitions. And actually, I found this ancient Greece, a nice ship, and you see here, this is like. Looks Viking. Looks like Viking. It's Viking. Could be also in the Northern European context, but it got a bit corrupted here. But I think it doesn't matter, because for the start, it makes much sense, because obviously what you see here, and the term governance comes from ancient Greek kubernan, which means like steering a ship or navigation a ship. Then also in Rome it has been applied in the guys that they were in the circus and riding these charts, these fighting charts, and also there's a relation to that. So steering and navigation and something like that. So this guy obviously he does this, he's there, but then it's very foggy here. So can he do this alone? And this, I think, is very contested. So what is the role of the guy who has the steering wheel in his hands, who's in charge of governing? And we need to look at we need to lift the fog, and we need to see what what else is there? So he cannot obviously do it alone. There must be something else in relation to that. So I said I'm a political scientist with a twist of administrative studies. I was in the Finnish National Graduate School of Administrative Studies, who financed my PhD, but I also have a degree in philology, and therefore I'm also interested in the origin of the word. And quite often, and also I suggest this to my students, when you come across a new term, just look at the dictionary, look at the English Oxford Dictionary, look at your national dictionaries and see how a certain terminology is defined here. So let's do that also. So the first, what the Oxford English Dictionary tells us about governance is the action or manner of governing, the fact that somebody governs well. It doesn't tell us much, but then I think if you come to the second point, there's a relation to an office, to a function, and also importantly, the power to do that, the power of governing. It relates to an authority. Somebody must have an authority or the permission to govern and to command, body of manship. So here we have the relation again to the Kubana, to the old Greek. Then I think the fourth is also much in relation to what Stamati said on this note of that we cannot neglect business. I mean, the business also has to play a role in here. So cannot have life, business, mode of living, or behavior. So there's a lot of elements that we come soon across again, but they already appeared here at this stage. But let's move on from the dictionary to the EU, and quite often, so if you look at the terminology governance, how it's defined in different EU languages, Portuguese and German, whatever, so you always find a reference to an action. So it's about management, it's about steering, it's about the coordination of activities of a public or private body, so private governance, public governance, and so on. Then, as I said, I have a degree in philology, and I looked at, this is, to be more precise, it's in Norwegian. Therefore, I cannot quite pronounce the Danish one, and I think nobody is here. Somebody from Denmark who could help me out. So, okay, no. Then I will jump over to the Swedish, which is similar. And in Swedish, and this is actually the title of some years ago, in 2000, in the early 2000s, there was the EU published, in order to advance the governance of the EU, a white paper on European governance. And the title of the Swedish version was, there was not the word governance, but it had styrelseformerna i EU. And it means forms of steering in the European Union. So no reference to governance per se, but to the forms of steering in the European Union. And the same as in Danish, I won't pronounce it, but the first word nye means new forms of steering in the European Union. So something with steering, coordination is evident here. Let's move from the EU to the World Bank and the OECD. The term governance was actually revived in the early 1990s by these two institutions, and for different reasons. I listed three of them here. So on the one hand, they wanted to distinguish between the act of governing and the institutions that are involved in governing, so to have a more precise picture of what is going on here, but also importantly to highlight the importance of civil society in governance. So not only looking at the public sector, but also civil society here. And importantly, also highlighting that the governance structures, or that the structures in which governance is taking place, is multi-tiered. So we have from the micro level to regional levels, national level, and to global level. So this concerns where and how governance is organized and coordinated. So also in the academia, there's a lot of debate going on. I think some colleagues of us found. This guy found 5 versions, there's 7 versions. One colleague even found 20 versions of governance. But I stick to Hurst, who had 5 versions of governance, because they're relevant for our unfolding of our argument of why we need meta-governance later on. So first of all, Hurst talks about good governance. So mainly he identifies this in the field of economic development, and I quote him here, in order to create an effective political framework conducive to private economic action. And this is not only reduced to the state, but for its development, also civil society and rule of law are essential. We'll come back to that point later. Then, as we talked about UNDP as an initiator of these 3 different cases, and also later on elevating or scaling up the good practices outside the national jurisdiction of these 3 case countries, we also need to look at the governance in the context of international institutions and regimes. So according to Hurst, we need to focus on the role of international agencies, interstate agreements, common commercial governmental practices and potential problems in their operation. So, and that is for the reason of we need to look at the question of accountability. So who's accountable in international governance? What about democratic control? So how can we democratically control systems of international governance? And specifically, if I think about the European Union in the early years, international governance was a very elitist, technocratic matter of affairs. So we have this integration in very technical fields through elites and not by involving the people to a large degree. And some might even say in some of the public policies that we have in the European Union, this is still the case. Then thirdly, in line with the private sector, the role of the private sector, corporate governance to improve accountability and transparency of the board's management of the corporation vis-à-vis shareholders. If we look at the context of developing countries, the concept of new public management is very important because here a lot of mistakes have been done. New public management has been around in the early 2000s, then it died out in the mid-2000s, but again now with the current financial crisis you find some weirdos and some crazy heads who still believe in that and want to revive this. So new public management, basically meaning that you cover something from the business sector, you put it to the public sector, and then all your problems are solved. Privatization of publicly owned firms and public services, management action in public administration, agentification, and that solves all the problems. As there are a lot of empirical evidence shows this is not the case, that there's a lot of brilliant case studies on Africa about agentification in the public administration development journal last year. We had one, but there's many different good examples of how this didn't work out. And fifthly, in terms of governance, Hurst looks at the issue of networks, partnerships, and deliberative forums. So what he termed also negotiated social governance. And as he said, that is very typical for the micro meso levels of governance that you find. I think tomorrow you're going to visit a LIDA project in the Hungarian countryside. So this is a poster example of this type of governance. I will say soon a few words, and this is actually what I studied more than 5 years, this LIDA program and endogenous rural development and how public-private partnerships in the rural areas in Europe, but now also they've been elevated, at least Finnish cases, there's some in Africa and in Latin America that follow the Finnish type of leader or a lot of action group mechanisms. So, but he's right to say that it's more like at the micro meso level of governments that you can identify them. So, the role of government, I think that's very important, and for those who have followed this debate, there were even some scholars that said that we live at times that we move from government to government. So government is phasing out, the state is disappearing, we live at post-political, non-hierarchical times, so everybody has the same chance and so on. With what we disagree. So I think the state is very much alive and kicking there and he has a role to play, but we'll come to that later. But also what James Rosenau said in the early 90s when he wanted to distinguish between governance and government. I think this is very true, and I quote him here also. And in addition to Rosenau, you can find other names that I listed here. James Rosenau, Champion, but then there's Rod Rhodes, Martin Olsen, Jan Heumann, and Hurst again from earlier. But James Rosenau said, and that's very important to take from here. I think that governance is not synonymous with government, because governance is a more encompassing phenomenon than government. So we have on the one hand the government institutions. But it also substitutes the informal and non-governmental mechanisms. So a lot of informalities going on, so between government institutions and non-governmental actors. So nothing is really taking place in a very open matter between government institutions. But there's a lot of interaction that is very informal. And also importantly, that those persons and organizations within this purview move ahead, satisfy their needs and fulfill their wants. Governance is a system of rule that works only if it's accepted by the majority, or at least by the most powerful of those it affects, and government cannot function even in the face of widespread opposition to their policies. So that we see in some countries as well. So this is important to see, so the role of government here. We also have our own opinion on that I will come later to see. Here's some more. I won't list them because I think we're running out of time and we would like to have some discussions, but Jon Pierre and Guy Peters, some of the eminent scholars. Koyman also is here, very important also in governance, that actually you don't have any there's no single actor that dominate unilaterally all governance mechanisms, so there's a complex interplay of different public, private and social actors and businesses, so that makes very much sense to look at that. And as first again, like we witness a power sharing between the nation states, subnational governments, NGOs and international agencies, and this is like very important for the context of our paper as well. But I will jump over this and you can read the slides. But let's move to good governance, because this is like the case that we looked at are in the developing world, at least two of them, and therefore I think it makes very much sense to look at the contestation of the term of good governance. So it has been around. Good governance implies also for me, first of all, good, that means that it's better than something else. So again, some kind of domination of a worldview is in there, if I'm careful here. But then how I would start to approach this term is by work of Zanotti. Zanotti has been very much she's in the tradition of governmentality studies. Michel Foucault, so she looked at the mechanisms of power, so micropower, and how power is constructed. And what she did is that she looked at how the concept of good governance has been constructed in the UNDP context. First of all, clearly identifying this as the key organizing concept for United Nations interventions, and the way it was presented in these documents as the key for democracy, development, and peace. And also very much related to the World Bank. So as she says, like we have like efficiency in the public sector, rule of law with regard to contract, an effective judiciary sector, respect for human rights, free press, pluralistic institutional structures, marketization of public services, reduction of overstaffing, decentralization, and NGO participation. Sounds all quite nice, I think. But then, the way it has been then turning out, and she remarks that, is that if you look at the developing world, quite often we find the way it has been implemented, not the way it has been constructed in the documents. It's something that's very apolitical. It's very technical. It's based on Western norms, Western forms of governance that we're seeing as universally valid. And quite often, democracy was also dealing from the political, so it has been implemented by elites, not by deliberation on the impacts. So also then that legitimacy is not via democratic ideas, but it's through good management. So once you have the results, then people will be convinced this is a good thing, if you want to put it like that. There's more people that criticized good governance all over the board. A German colleague of mine, Christopher Knill, and then Wolfgang Wexler from Tallinn as well, says that good governance, similar to NPM, which is also related to good governance, you have these neoliberal principles, are very strong neoliberal principles in the public sector. So, I think Drexler put it quite right, arguing that we have a very strong value judgment in favor of the retrenchment of the state, which is supposed to yield to business standards, principles, and not least interests, privileging the second over the first sector, or even in first sector areas. So, getting the state, cutting it down, following this, streamlining it, and then merging municipalities, and then you're getting there. So this is from the part of the Western world. Then, if you look at developing countries, and as one representative, I have Pata Sarati, who said, who criticized good governance for similar also to this kind of Western ideas, Western norms, that we bring in civil society, but then not really being very much sensitive to what is the situation in the given context, because quite often we only see civil society involved that has close relations to the government in a given country. So, as he said, leaving out vast sectors and communities which are not represented to formal, recognized, or accepted civil society bodies. So this is the problem. So we need to be much more specific when we look at the case. We cannot just say, as I had one slide ago, that yes, we have involvement of NGOs and CSOs, but we need to be very specific in looking what is really going on there. Governance also, we can identify a lot of steering coordination deficits, and again, this would bring me back to the EU. You can see that there's a problem like of information distribution, and we find that information deficit. Not everybody who wants to have access to policy and information has equally access. So, like if you look at municipalities, I would argue that big ones are favored over small ones. They don't have the capacity to get information on different programs. So there's a lot of things to improve here. This relates to the lack of financial human resources. There's many studies on that. Concrete examples that I have studied: municipalities and regional policy. So they should have like the same starting positions, but they're not at all equally able to take part in governance due to lack of financial human resources to get access to information, due to the wrong party affiliation and so on. So overall, if we stay at the EU, so then I would say there's problems that are generated in the national field of a member state, but then also in the EU field that doesn't have enough leverage. So probably this is one thing that you could further dig in when you look at the LEADER case and rural development. So where we have very, very big differences between the EU member states and how actually the grassroots level is empowered. So in sum, all this has negative effects on legitimacy and democracy, I would argue. In short, problems that we can identify, and I have here in general in systems of governance, but particularly in multi-level governance in the EU, questions of participation, questions of coordination need to be solved, questions of accountability. So it's not that we live in a post-political, non-hierarchical world, as some scholars wanted to tell us a few years ago. So somebody has to be accountable. We have to look at effectiveness. Are these new forms of government really more effective than traditional forms? We can at least challenge these questions. Are these new forms of governance really open? And how can we improve that? And are they coherent to solve particular policy problems in the real world? So at least on the note of accountability, participation, coherence, and so on, I have another name here, Robert Jessop, and he is actually, I would term him as the father of meta-governance. In 2003, he suggested that the concept, he will probably agree with this. So should we move from governance to meta-governance, and why? So, and as he argued back in 2003 when he came up, we're not in a post-political, non-hierarchical time. We need to have some sort of authority, some sort of somebody has to be accountable, and we have to have somebody to blame, but we have to have somebody who also empowers the weaker actors. So that can be national governments or other political authorities in governance, setting the conditions in which governance is taking place. So it can be in the context of this continent where we live, it can be the EU, it can be national governments, and that's for the sake of defining the ground rules and the regulatory order and where governance is taking place. On a similar note, also then criticizing us, the researchers that dealt with the governance discourse for many years. Probably there was for a long time a tendency of ignoring the strength of the democratic nation states, and as first said, that it's perfect monopoly of competence in determining who shall govern what and how. So we cannot neglect the role of the state here. We need to bring the state back in to understand its role and to see also, first of all, as an opportunity to improve governance, but also to study and see why and what the state does wrong in the overall meta-governance of a given policy. And soon we'll come to the meta-governance. So, to end the second part of the lecture, again with a similar slide, now it's not corrupted anymore, so this guy has the authority, I would say, but then there's a lot more if you enlarge the picture. So there's maybe somebody who's giving signals and fire signals to help him navigating through the stormy waters of sustainable development or the sea, and then you have some, maybe they're not really private, and I'm not really happy to sit there, but at least they're also keeping the thing going. So we could also ask, so how do we improve the situation of these guys sitting below the deck, and so on. So on that note, I would soon come to the second part. We're running out of time, but is there any questions concerning this political scientists' weird ideas on governance? Right? Yes, there.
So two questions, and in the previous presentation we were talking also about that maybe politics will disappear or completely transform
transform. That you were talking that maybe we are moving from government to governance. Do you think that it's possible we are also moving from politics to policies? Or what are your reflections on that? And is there any research on what should be built on a national level and at a local level and at an international level? I mean, the EU has this principle that they are dealing only with issues that can be done with more efficiency at an EU level than at a national level. But do you have something similar for perhaps for other institutions and perhaps for national versus local level?
Okay, so three sort of questions. So the move from government to governance was the first, linked to the move from politics to policy. So I would argue that we are not moving from government to governance. So this was like what portrait. So the state is very much, even if you look at those, if we stay in the EU, I think it's boring for some of you here that have no idea of the EU, that are out of this context, but let's stick in the EU because you mentioned this also in your question. So there's some policies where clearly also the EU wanted to decentralize and give power and empower the local jurisdictions and have like more like endogenous development starting from below. So like regional policy, then you have rural development policy. But what you see also is like you have like counter trends on the other hand. So you're not at all like this. Some of the states were not all happy and willing to give and empower the local level. So you have the regional policy per se. You have partnership as a core principle. That you have like cooperation at the local level, but to implement policies, but not designing the policies. So especially if you look at countries like the UK, so you have a very strong opposition towards decentralization. Although you have like devolution here, yes, to Wales and Northern Ireland, but overall also at that level, so they wanted to keep the strings in their hand. And there's you asked for some studies on that. There was a colleague of mine, his name is Ian Page, he's from Sheffield. He came up with the concept of the state as the gatekeeper. So on the one hand, you have the EU that wanted to decentralize and empower further, but then the state is gatekeeping what is going on really. So in Germany, you find good examples of rural development policies where you have like problems of information distribution. So there's empirical stuff on that at the level of so in Germany it's decentralized to the level of Länder and information was not distributed to certain local jurisdictions because they had the wrong party affiliation, so there's stuff on that. And the move from politics to policy. Yes, I mean this is unfortunate. Yes, so you have like in some areas you lack probably the control of really what is going on. So you have like the reliance. John Domenico Maholi, he studied this. So the EU as a regulatory state, that you have like democracy via regulation. So you have regulation, you have regulatory regimes, but this is dealing from the political, so you don't have any control. You have like epistemic communities, you have like experts from the EU, you have experts from national state, you have experts from the local level, but you have a lack of control of how this knowledge community function, in fact. So this is on this specific case. Then was what needs to be solved at local level. I think there's many things that you need, and I believe in this, and therefore I was happy to be part of this writing exercise last winter. So that I think that you have very many nice stories that start from below, that are easily overseen in the whole. You have like when I came back from Rio, people said, okay, Rio, you have been there, was a big, but it was not really successful. And I said, well, but you have like very nice local level strategies, and I think if you combine them, if you link them, there's a lot of things going on that so I wouldn't be that pessimistic. Of course, the overall is a failure, but I was never a big fan of the overall big picture. So look at the local level, believe in the power and in the structure. Of course, you need to empower them as well. But this is part of the second part of this, how this can happen. Yes.
I have a question back to definitions. This theoretical, let's say, debate that you presented, it reflects pretty much the Western tradition, right? Joseph, Bob Jessup, Foucault. How is the voice of people, of scholars from, let's say, Central Asia or Africa or Latin America is reflected there, if any, how it's reflected? And why it's important, I think, because as you mentioned, Mikhail Foucault and his concept of knowledge as power, it's very important because if we define good governance in terms of Western discourse, and then we go to Nepal, as we saw examples from previous
Yeah.
presentation, then this is exactly how Western power then exercised.
Yes, yes. Well, that's a very good point because, again, you're right. I mean, this is very much based on the construction of our knowledge from a Western view. And I think we need to also, we as public administration scholars, we need really to look what is going on. In my faculty, we do this. We have now a course on non-Western PA. So there's a long tradition. We have also a PhD student from Uzbekistan who studied this, what's Uzbekistan? Mahala institution, so which is a very long tradition there. So which we as Westerners see as it's some kind of or critically, some see it as critically as kind of it's corruption, but it's very deeply rooted in the culture, so that you have that the communities cover, so that you have that you have a large coverage of what we would say informal economy, but in fact it functions as a very sophisticated system of people supporting each other in when they have economic problems, when they want to send somebody out to study, then the community collects money and sends the talented out to study. So I think we need to be more open-minded towards this what is going on there. And I would blame it on my age. I'm just not 93 and not even the turning, but I think this looking from the Western, putting our Westernized glasses, even Foucault glasses aside, and looking what kind of traditions we have in the non-Western world is very important. But on the same note, I also have to say that why I became a favorite to this meta-governance approach, because per se, and the way it's constructed, again from Western knowledge, is that we can be more sensitive towards administrative cultures in the countries that we apply, because we have to involve endogenous knowledge from the very setting, from the very micro setting of that country. And I think this is the beauty of this concept, which also has flaws, as all kind of academic concepts have, but I think it's a starting point. And when I exchanged my view with colleagues from Africa, they said, yes, that's a very welcome thing. It sounds a bit like the meta-governance again, sounds a bit constructed, but I think I will shed some light on that, what we mean by that. But good intervention.
Just a very short question. Yeah. Could you tell us what are the indicators of good governance? How can you tell good governance from a bad governance? Very simple.
I'm not a fan of indicators, and shall I give it over? And
words are indicators too, if you like.
Yeah.
Philology is.
But you have this corruption, you have this anti-corruption, you have there's a lot of indicators around. But
how do you?
If I'm allowed an intervention
you're allowed
here,
intervention, yes.
I think that we should carry on with the last part of the presentation, because there you will see what we call elements of governance, and this would be a good idea, or might answer partially your question on indicators, how we use these elements of governance as, let's say in brackets, in quotation marks, indicators to see what we have done for the cases that in Croatia and Mongolia and Nepal. If still is not clear, and I'm not a political scientist or a governance person, I'm not even an economist, as I tell you, I have an environmental science background. But if it's still, we can open again for discussions after the end of this, and see what we can do.
May I enter with a slight intervention on this, because indicators is an important issue for us, and we're trying to do something on this. In previous courses we kind of separated them, but now we decided to spread it over the existing sessions. We are actually raising a very critical issue about indicators of governance, good governance of governance. And it depends how you define, and it depends how you measure. So first, there are things which are difficult to measure but are easy to indicate. And you can indicate them both at the level of outcomes and at the level of perceptions. So for the level of outcomes, it's much difficult to quantify good or bad governance, because it's this problem of attribution. How do you actually assign some failure to whom? It's a very tricky issue. But at the end of the day, you can have some proxy indicators which can be correlated with performance of governance. And the problem is that usually there is no statistics on this, and this is not even as expensive, simply it is really time consuming and difficult to implement. Just a few examples. One indicator of the quality of governance or the way that governance systems perform could be, for example, the time which is necessary for an ambulance to show up when there is an emergency, or the time of reaction on certain institutional structures, or quality of services provided by the administration, registration, speed, whatever. So there are things which can be applied, but you should be careful because every attempt has certain hypotheses behind it. You need to be clear about this set of assumptions which you make in terms of all these indicators. But the other way of approaching is measuring perceptions of the clients, which is, in my view, not quite good because it is, first of all, very relative. It depends what is your background, and if you have very bad services and suddenly something improved, you can immediately have a spike in satisfaction, but it doesn't mean much in terms of improving the quality of services. On the other hand, it is very subjective in terms of manipulability. It's easily manipulated with some campaigns, media, and so on. Thank you for raising this issue.
I think we take the questions on towards the end because we are like, we have to end at 11. Was it so? Yeah. So then I finish this, and then if you could keep your questions, and then we have the final discussions afterwards. So let's move this because, as Damar said, let's and on the note of indicators also, because I think this would always imply that it's good governance and somebody has bad governance. So then can we make the distinction between, if we look at the different development in a given context? So therefore, I wouldn't like. I'm not a fan of measuring this by trying to measure this more in this way. So shortly, the article, as Damar said, it's open access. What we did in the article follows this structure like introduction, current state of sustainable development affairs, some stuff that Stamatis talked about earlier. Then we move on to meta-governance that we construct as the governing of governance. Then we have these 3 cases, sustainability in the making. We term them lessons from development winners because we saw that the development was successful, the different strands that came together in the end, and then we concluded and argued that meta-governance should be actually a proper meta-component in the design and in the implementation phase of any intervention aiming at sustainability. Why we say that proper meta-component? Because as an important note ahead is that the components that we soon unfold where it was not it was an ad hoc development of meta-governance. It was not designed. So we have successful cases. Mainly again in the EU, like in Denmark, you have which were a meta-governance case which was constructed per se in the city of Copenhagen on urban development. So this was, and on that note also, so meta-governance doesn't have to be meta out there, but it's meta in the sense that we can also have micro-meta-governance, if you will. But we soon shed some light. It doesn't mean that we have people from or actors involved from the micro level to the meso level, national level. And international level, but it can be also micro. But soon we hope to make more sense into this. So meta-governance, as we defined as the governance of governance, it can be also, but I wouldn't deal with this in more detail today, it can be also a meta-theory. So in that we look at what the governance theories have been achieved so far, what have been done so far. So as a meta-theoretical issue here. But what we would see is that, or the way we understood or constructed meta-governance in our paper was that meta-governance is about, on the one hand, reflexive coordination, and reflexive that we have an involvement of different actors from different levels involved, but also the organization of the framework conditions at the starting point. So when we have a policy that starts to operate, setting the framework conditions at this phase, in which governance is take place, which involves the identification of potentials prior to setting up a policy, but also once a policy is already implemented, be it good governance, so we can see is there some problems that in the implementation of this policy, what are the failures, and again the failures identified by deliberation of different actors involved in here. So and failures that we see in the traditional modes of governance. I will say soon what we see as traditional modes of governance. So important here is that for meta-governance to function, we have to see that responsibilities can be and in fact are shared among the public and private actors that are engaged in specific policies, and also by non-governmental organizations. Ideally, and of course, there's some flaws, but we can, when we are aware of what is meta-governance, what meta-governance is, and we want to identify the counterbalancing the failures, then we can also see it via this model. And importantly, also that we have to see that different actors have joint functions that they exercise together, but also their specific functions. And all these functions, be it their specific functions that each actor has, all the joint functions, they contribute to policy making in a meta-governance setting. And this picture is not in the paper, but it might help visualizing this. Political science like this kind of complicated pictures, but let me try to help you with this. And maybe we start in the inner circle, and with a concrete example. So with hierarchical governance, what we term network governance, market governance, and self-governance. So quite often, if you look at the state or the context in which a policy is taking place, it's a hierarchical structure. So maybe I use for tomorrow, you go to this LEADER project, it's a rural development project. The overall structure of this, where this rural development in the EU is implemented in is a common agricultural policy, a very hierarchical policy. So top-down exogenous development from the top to the up, and then once they realized that, or once they inbuilt the second pillar, the rural development pillar, into this agricultural policy as another form of improving the socio-economic situation in Europe's rural areas. In addition to the farming sector, they built in elements of network governance, and you will see the LEADER project tomorrow. So you have public-private partnerships at local level, so local action groups that are functioning here. It would be ideal if you would visit the Hungarian project, if you would visit the German project and the Finnish project, then you could see the difference again here also. So we have, like, in some national settings, we have the element of network governance is differently developed. I would argue in Finland, because they have, and Ireland is another good example, so much more decentralized. In Finland, you have this local action groups that you're going to visit tomorrow. You have the steering committees, consist of, and in Germany, close to 50% is the public sector and the steering committees of these local action groups. And in Finland, you have, by law, you have 1/3 are from the local residents, so which you don't find in any other place in the EU. So this comes very close to self-governance. So, and you have more the element of market governance also included, because you want to have co-financing from local businesses, and local businesses are also interested in these EU projects. But, so if we would put the rural development in here, you would find different calibrations and different fine-tunings in different member states. So they have made different. You find different constellations and different. The policies live a different life actually in different national constitutions. And we would also argue then in our cases, so probably what they have done in Mongolia might be possible the same way in another country. So although it's scaled up, and people want to use it as an example in other national settings, they need to bring these guys here together to see what is the potential, what is the potential to do so, to implement this specific policy in our national context, in order to create a tailor-made approach to policy here. So I don't know if this was a very enlightened example, but this is one example that I came to think of, which is to me at least very obvious. So I mentioned the role of specific role of certain actors and the joint function. So this would be specific role of certain actors. So we have at the left we have the state, and for us it's very important also to highlight that we don't say the state per se, but that we distinguish between the local level of government, regional government, and national levels of government in here. The state setting the ground rules in which governance is taking place. The state has institutions in which governance is implemented, public policies are implemented, setting regulatory frameworks, and ultimately and ideally, of course, we find also failures here, but taking over accountability and responsibility if something goes wrong. So therefore we need the state also importantly for empowering weaker actors, providing information, campaigns, telling the guys what kind of EU projects you have, where you can attract extra money and so on. The state functions, it's similar to what we have on the right, political authority beyond the state, the governmental organizations. So in the case of the EU, this is clear for us very much. Some of them are also subject to might be differing a bit. So in the EU, so we have groundworks institutions also to implement policies. That's clearly the case, but in our cases, so in that it was like capacity building mechanisms were very important here, or providing money basically to the jurisdictions. We also need, in order for meta-governance to be successful and in order to create successful policies, we need the private sector, private actors. We have different ways of how this function, corporate social responsibility. We find good examples of how the private sector assisted non-governmental organization. Private actors also provide information to how certain policies are implemented, and so on. And importantly, civil society organizations and non-governmental organizations for a policy to touch base, for a policy to take it over, in order to create ownership, we need civil society organizations and NGOs. They provide scale-specific knowledge from the local level, so what is possible, what kind of policies can we implement in our jurisdiction, up to the national level ideally. They ideally also raise awareness of country or region-specific peculiarities, and ultimately fostering endogenous development as opposed to exogenous development. So development from below, but from the top to the down. And then finally we have the outer circle. When everything is functioning well, we have mediation between the different actors. We have empowerment of weaker actors. Actors deliberate on appropriate choices in the national setting and the local setting. This also relates to interactive learning processes, ideally institutional learning as well. So we have institutional restructurations. There are many examples for that. We can have a new calibration of institutions. In our case, exact bank transformed from a non-bank to a bank. We have transformations of public-private partnerships and so on. Ultimately, also coordinate collective action, and then in our case, it was quite important that Stamatis mentioned that, and I will say that soon again. A few words on that. That we have, if we have good local practices, that somebody enables them to travel from the bottom to the up. That can be across countries, like in the case of Croatia, starting from the pilot of the city of Sisak to other parts of Croatia, but then ultimately also out of the national jurisdiction. So somebody needs to highlight the case if there was a successful case and tell people, okay, this was successful because of that, and then we can start the new round of policy making by deliberating on how would this be functioning in our national constitution, in our national setting. So to repeat once again, so we need to jointly identify and utilize the potential, jointly by different partners, and counterbalance observe failures in the conventional modes of governance. Overall meta-governance can improve democratic decision-making and participation. It contributes to the steering and coordination of collective action, as we argue different partners, different sectors are brought to the table together. And we need, in order for governance to be effective, we really need this balanced patchwork of the government, but of the market also. We need to include the market forces and social actions. I cannot say that often enough interaction among actors, that's the key that we need to highlight. And again, we have different actors that have, as I said, as I showed you in the circle, they have joint functions, but also specific role, and all of them contribute to policy making here. And ultimately, this works to the right fusion of different modes of governance for the specific setting in which a policy has to be implemented, in order to create tailor-made approaches for the very jurisdiction where this is going to function. So the role of meta-governance in all this is that meta-governance is providing the venues and the space for exploring and exploring the opportunities, and the space for deliberation on this innovative solution. So is this reform, what is this concept or the policy that we implemented successfully in Nepal, is it really suitable for our neighboring country, and why? What can we do in order to further improve it? Once we know what they have done, and probably also once we know what failures they have done. And then meta-governor is also able to act as an impartial broker. We have formal conventions, but sometimes also informality and less formal agreements, and probably can fine-tune them. There's some leeway in order to create an impact of policy further, to to bring this to the informality and the formal conventions to really reconfigure them, bring them together. Importantly, and there's a lot of stuff still to do. If I look at the EU, coordinate cross-sector and cross-border policies. Cross-sector policies, we look at what this cause is all about, sustainable development. If we look at the EU, there's still a lot of things to do in order to coordinate environmental policy, agricultural policy, and regional policy, rural development policy. So they don't come really together. It's still a very sectoral approach, I would argue. Finally, also we have said it many times, if we identify a good practice, good governance, we can also verify, replicate, and scale it up for others to retune, reconfigure it, and then make some kind of downloading for the national context for our local jurisdiction. And there, the meta-government can help, and this is what we can see in terms of UNDP and the successful programs which we had. So some of the elements, and I wouldn't call them indicators of that, but some of the elements that we identified, elements of meta-governance brought back to the cases, and we soon stop our journey here around the globe. So the question of the element of fusion or integration of different modes of governance. So let me go to Mongolia first. So what we saw is with the example of financial literacy trainings that were provided to children that were between the ages of 14 and 18. This was done as a joint effort by the public sector, the Mongolia's Ministry of Social Welfare and Labor, by the national media and private sector companies, and ultimately also Bank who financially contributed to that. In case of Croatia, we had this public-private partnerships, which is a very common form of fusion of different modes of governance between the public and private sector. We had one slide here, the information centers network that was built up, so where citizens in Croatia can get information and advice on what energy efficient technologies are available for residential housing. Quickly on empowerment of weaker actors. We had that, and in terms of Nepal, somebody's talked about that, empowerment of local residents. I wouldn't, again, go to detail anymore, but empowerment of children and women, I think the rural household incomes. There was this nice observation that they were made. So when so it was usually women who were in charge of collecting wood for their stoves at home, and once the availability was decreasing, they involved the children usually, and they involved their daughters. So once this project then gained momentum and success, we saw an increased enrollment rates for particularly for girls in rural schools in Nepal. Mongolia, we had this empowerment of low-income women, so the group and individual loans were provided to vulnerable women and women as entrepreneurs. Somebody said that, so I will make it quick. And then finally, the element of which was important in the context of UNDP and national or global governance, that the elevation or the enabling of good local practice, the scaling up of these practices to travel across borders. And then in the case of Nepal, this rural energy development program serving as a model in Afghanistan, Bhutan, Cambodia, Kenya, Mongolia, Pakistan, Tajikistan, Tanzania, Uganda, and Mongolia's Bank experience. Now we have like training and staff exchange with countries such as Bosnia, Cambodia, China, El Salvador, and so on. Croatia also, like, we have this potential now replicated in Belarus, Serbia, and Tajikistan. And to conclude, almost in time, 2 minutes I have, so 2 last concluding slides. So what we identified was this, in all cases, a robust policy mix in the meta-governance settings. It was evident in all cases, although this was ad hoc. It was not designed as such an approach. It emerged, and it was also not designed as an approach who attracts all 3 strands of sustainable development as such, but it emerged over time. So ideally then would be to have this incorporated as a programmatic element of all new policies that come up. What was also evident was, for these policies to be successful, we need and overall for sustainable development, we need commitment of actors from different spheres, and different spheres we mean the public, private, and civil society organizations, and from different scales, like from micro to the global, if needed, the global level here. International government organizations act as initiators of meta-governance approaches. We talked about this quite a lot. So they mobilize stakeholders, they support communication, and ultimately, once this program was successful, they spread good practices beyond the borders. Good for these 3 programs was that the national governments were very keen to taking up these programs, and that also regional local governments were very keen on being involved, like as pilot recipients and as implementers of programs. So also CSOs and NGOs played an important role in here. We said that. And the last slide. So what we would argue, again, we have this our micro perspective here. For progress towards sustainable development, we need this situational tailor-made approaches that are sensitive to the situation, to the realities in the countries as such. We need to include all relevant actors. Without NGOs and without CSOs, this wouldn't function. If we want to enhance economic viability and social inclusion and justice, and then environmental protection maintenance, they went hand in hand in all these cases that were identified. So what we argued and what we identified together with Stamatis and Balázs was that this meta-governance overall and contributed to the reduction of the vagueness of sustainable development. So it supported really solutions that towards context-specific but holistic sustainable development. Overall, we had like first different strengths approach, but then overall the other 2 strengths also profited from that. So, and as I said, this was very ad hoc. We would argue that this should be really programmatically incorporated to all levels of sustainable development processes. So whether it concerns local actions, like in our cases, sustainable development strategies, or then the emerging SDGs overall. And on that note, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Almost just in time. The problem is that we have half a minute for questions and answers. Quickly. Please.
Very short one. You mentioned that we need to verify, or meta-governance has a role to verify, replicate, scale up good practice. And then you said that it has to also enable local practices. And the question is whether we already have such good practices to refer to. And the second, if these IGOs, international government organizations, or the international NGOs are initiator of meta-governance, I mean, it's already happening. So we could say that the successful project, for example, the big Transporter EU project, is already meta-governance, or not? Or we need more than just cooperation between, let's say, 6 countries.
Maybe 2 more questions and you will address them.
My first question is about access to information. You mentioned about the necessity of access to information, but what do you think how to deal with the situation when there is access to information, but people have no interest in this information? Like, for example, to take the example of budget, like we pay taxes, but we never care how our revenues are spent. Like these documents are published everywhere else, but nobody cares what's going on. And the second one is about citizen participation. What do you think is the role of citizen participation in terms of good governance and meta-governance?
And to make question about information more complex. If people have technical capacity to analyze this information, or if they should be provided with easily digestible information, but who will assure that what they are provided with is relevant description of situation?
And the last question for this one.
I knew it. Oh. No, you were waiting all the time. Last intervention, so I can ignore this.
Okay, I'd like to agree more with you as respect to the need for doing different actors and governance and meta-governance issues. But the third one is that the starting point for this is always the public. And the public has got its own language, its own goals, and this very, very often doesn't fit with the private sector reasoning or way of thinking or way of acting, and the same for the civil society. Let's think of MDGs. MDGs are clearly driven by the public sector, and the targets and goals that consist in can be pursued just only the public sector or NGOs. The private sector may have the capacity to improve the state of the world with respect to MDGs, but actually we have no clue about this. Okay, there is no way for doing this because they use metrics that we cannot. I work for an oil company, and my fear is that it's going to be the same for SDGs. We are trying to advocate for okay, let's set goals that can apply to the private sector, because otherwise we will do just charity, as it's happening for the MDGs. And when we do charity, we are not effective because it's just giving out money.
Okay. Yeah. I'm happy about your effort to change things, change the views of government and what is going on. I think this is an improvement of what we have now because the markets have obviously failed. And for us in Africa, it's a different thing altogether. When you're talking about stabilization, privatization, liberalization, and there is no protection for us there. Even you privatize, it's usually for outsiders coming, buy the equipment, cut it out of the country, and nothing gets working. So thank God Obi came back because for some time he has been always anti the command system. And I keep on wishing, I wish you were in Africa, you enjoy what you have on the ground here. You really have an asset you can improve on. We have nothing. So I think your involvement of the public sector will help out a lot. Then on your view about the measures and indicators of good governance, I think it's more speculative now. There is no indicator about what good governance means. Because the more we think about indicators as a simple way of explaining complex things, it gets more complex. Then must democracy be the term for good governance? Can't we try other things, experiment new things? For us back home in Nigeria, democracy is beginning to be less efficient. It is costly, it's costing people's life. The military dictators felt that, democracy is the in thing now. They removed their uniform, converted to civilians. The 90% of the Senate, up to 70%, let me not be exaggerating, we are retired military generals. And the same thing keeps on going over and over again. They reduce the salaries of the people and keep on increasing their own salaries. So is it a way that you could include other governments without being democratic, even if it means being a benevolent dictator?
Okay, thank you. I think enough questions, please. And you will have a second round again.
Exactly.
5 seconds.
Help me out.
I help you out.
So, first of all,
your handwriting.
I translate. So the first question was on good practices to refer to and scaling up of good practices. So I think yes, we have this. I mean, I would see, and the way we perceive the case that we study, there are these good practices that we can refer to. Important to note, and again, of course, and they have to be replicated. And this is in fact what is going on at the moment. So Mongolia, Croatia, and Nepal. And there's 7 more good cases in relation to that. There's been a recent publication on these successful micro development studies. Stamatis has is it here? Is one of these publications?
Triple Wins.
The Triple Wins publication on that. So I think these would be good cases. So this was an easy one. Your question on is the EU a meta governance? Again, as I said, so I mean we have. I would argue that we have micro meta governance as well. We can have meta governance in a city. So this is what we observed in the case of Denmark, where public sector observed some problems in delivering youth policies in the city of Copenhagen. So they brought together researchers, they brought together sociologists, they brought together youth organizations in order to improve the impact of policy. So this is how I would see, again, as a meta-governance approach. EU, I think we in the EU, in parts, yes, again, I would approach the EU in terms of its public policies in order to understand whether this is a meta-governance success or not. I would say that in terms of sustainable development, I would probably say that this is really a success story here, because we have still too many sectoral policies that have an environmental impact and that are not seen in connection to that. So we have agricultural policy, we have very strong sectoral interest when the new common agricultural policy reform ideas came to the bargaining table, and there was a little bit of set aside brought into the bargaining. Then you immediately had the farmers' organization saying, "Oh, no, this doesn't work. I mean, this is too bureaucratic." So I think here we have really a meta-governance problem to combine that. Also, if you look at the rural areas, so we still have we lack this kind of meta-governance approach. Somebody who can bring together. We have it in some countries in terms of. I would say in Finland we have cross-ministerial steering boards where we have we have all ministries that implement policies with an impact on rural areas come together and have to deliberate on what is the impact of this financial policy reform on rural areas, what is the impact of this regional policy reform on rural areas, so on. So you find that, but across the board, I wouldn't say that I wouldn't construct the EU as a meta-governance. That would be, at least I'm too young and too unexperienced with the concept. So maybe at some point I can say this is like yes, half and half. I see that. Then the question, as I remember, and I wrote down access to information, but nobody cares. Something like that, right? I think that's again a meta-governance failure. So we have even if I stay again in the EU, so even this interaction, you can ask the question to these guys tomorrow also when you go there. So how do you understand what the EU wants you to do? So do you understand the language that comes? So I think that's a big problem. So to translate this to the ordinary language. So we have a meta-governance problem here. So to bring language to more people that want to be involved. What could be done, and to link to there was a follow-up question on budgeting. So again, we have to the other country that I come from, Estonia, we have now elements of participatory budgeting, like pilot testing. So where local residents can be involved in deciding on the budget of the municipality. So in a different way, that can be via e-voting, or they can come together. So there's ways. Probably this increases the interest. But access to information is clearly a problem, as I said, in Germany, and if anybody would be interested in reading my PhD, I was very critical towards the rural development program in Germany, where you have the access to information was very problematic. And here I would advise you to read a bit of the European political sociologists and from the Bourdieu School. I think they help you to understand that. Technical capacity to add, I lost you at some point. You have to follow up.
The quality of information.
The quality of information.
No, ability of people to digest information, and if it's provided in easily digestible way, for instance, by journalists who are sure that what they provide is true, but not just
some quality control.
Yes, quality
control on information.
Actually, kind of censorship. Good old style European censorship.
I would give there was something on the public sector language in relation to public dominance in the MDGs and towards the move to SDGs. Probably I leave this one.
Yeah. But maybe first we should
to this one.
think the quality of the.
Just one minute, because I'm sorry to misuse the coffee break, but that's sometimes how it happens. Just information is too important just to let it go like this, because we should not be misguided by the idea of provide access and that is solving all the problems. Access to information is intrinsically linked to the policy process, participation, and to a certain extent matureness of the civil society and the public. First of all, it doesn't matter do you have access or not if you don't have any opportunities to use it properly. So just for curiosity, of course, it's not useful. Nobody would invest additional efforts, time, sometimes resources to go and learn something if it doesn't matter. You cannot link the information and data to some policy or practical change. So I think this is a critical link. Second, any kind of democratization is related to human capital, human capabilities. So if you don't understand what you are reading, what you are interpreting, it is not a problem of centralized system of access or centralized censorship. So you can't have both worlds, not invest on the one hand in the public awareness, knowledge, skills on the one hand, and just have the technical side of access to information. So both need to be addressed. I suggest that on this optimistic note we go to break. We will have opportunities to discuss those issues during the break, so feel free to address our...
And don't forget to sign in for the menu tomorrow.
May I suggest we start 20 minutes to 12 so that we have some break. Please let me remind you, just one minute, your attention. Let me remind you. It is important for us so that everybody in this hall